Mark in your hymn books number 560, if you would. That'll be our song of invitation following the lesson, 560. Good to see so many of you here this evening. We're going to be in Ecclesiastes chapter 12 to begin tonight. Ecclesiastes chapter 12, beginning in verse 1, and I'll be reading from the English Standard Version. Remember also your Creator in the days of your youth, before the evil days come and the years draw near, of which you will say, I have no pleasure in them, before the sun and the light and the moon and the stars are darkened and the clouds return after the rain. In the day whenever the keepers of the house tremble and the strong men are bent and the grinders cease, because they are few, and those who look through the windows are dimmed, and the doors on the street are shut. Whenever the sound of the grinding is low, and the one rises up at the sound of a bird, and all of the daughters of the song are brought low. They are afraid also of what is high, and the terrors are in the way. The almond tree blossoms, the grasshopper drags itself along, and desire fails, because man is going to his eternal home, and the mourners go about the streets. Before the silver cord is snapped, or the golden bowl is broken, or the pitcher is shattered at the fountain, or the wheel broken at the cistern, and the dust returns to the earth as it was, the spirit returns to God who gave it. My question for you as we begin our lesson this evening is, when should a person begin their walk with God? When is a right time for someone to commit themselves to the Lord? And that is going to be the push of our talk this evening, but with the idea within our mind always that God would have us at whatever time in our life that we are. And that's true too, isn't it? That God's mercy and God's grace is extended to us so long as we have life and Christ has yet to return. But just ponder that for a moment. When is the best time for somebody to become a Christian, or for someone to commit themselves to the Lord? We're going to come back to this passage in Ecclesiastes a little bit later within the lesson, and I'm going to read it from a version of the Bible maybe that's a little bit less mysterious than what the English Standard Version has it there, maybe more in plain lingo, but we will come back to that. Let's go first to 2 Corinthians chapter 6. The question is, when is the right time for one to give themselves to the Lord? Look at 2 Corinthians chapter 6, and let's look at what Paul says, beginning in verse 1. Working together with him, then, we appeal to you not to receive the grace of God in vain. For he says, in a favorable time I listened to you, and in the day of salvation I have helped you. Behold, now is the favorable time. Now is the day of salvation. Now, that is actually a quote, verse 2, from Isaiah chapter 49 and verse 8. And if you were to go back to Isaiah chapter 49 and to begin reading in verse 2 and to read through verse 8, what you would find out is that that is a messianic prophecy. And what God is actually prophesying there through Isaiah is a day, a time, an era in history whenever he was going to provide salvation for all man. Now, why would that be relevant to Isaiah? Well, Isaiah is Jewish. Isaiah is under the law of Moses, and during Isaiah's time in history and culture, one came to the Lord through the law of Moses. If you were a Gentile, you were able to proselytize. You could become a convert and thereby be saved. But with Isaiah's prophecy, here this is, that there is going to come a time, that there's going to come an era, some point in history when God is going to provide salvation to all mankind. You won't have to be a Jew any longer. And that day Paul is saying is now. That era, that opportunity to be saved is now no longer under the law of Moses, no longer under that old covenant, but now that day is here. And we live in it. The first century Corinthian church lived in it as they were being written to by Paul. And what time is that? Well, it's whenever the plea of ours to be a child of God is answered by God with that opportunity to become his in Christ. And Paul's admonition is, do not allow that invitation to go in vain. Do not allow his grace to be in vain. You ever received an invitation within the mail that you didn't go to? Maybe it's an advertisement, like say, well, there's so many that we get within the mail. In fact, we get so many things within the mail, they don't even make it into the house a lot of times. I'm passing by the garbage can on the way into the house a lot of times, and I just throw them right there. Can you imagine the post office workers? I kind of feel for them because they go through those bundles of advertisements, and you know that half of those that go especially into those P.O. boxes are not even going to make it out of the post office. They're going to end up right there in the trash by the end of the day. It has to be kind of, discouraging for them. But there are invitations that we keep getting, and they are in vain, right, if I don't care to respond to them. And it could be, go to this such and such a place, or have this service provided for you, or we have this certain thing for sale. Just come on down, and if you took advantage of it right now, then you could get a special deal. And, we say, that's not a value to me. That's not something that I really want. Or the cost in which it's going to take for me to travel to get there, it doesn't make sense for me to go there. And so, although an invitation might be there, we don't accept it. Paul has just said, God has something available that is of value, but you still have a choice. What was the question that we started off with? What is the right time within a person's life in order for them to be converted? When is the right time for someone to commit themselves to God? And what's Paul's answer? The time is now. Today is the day of salvation. And you say, no, wait a minute. You just pointed that was actually him saying the fulfillment of Isaiah's prophecy about the gospel era in general. Yes, but James says, what do you know about tomorrow? Let's go to that passage in James chapter 4, lest we think, I have enough time. Let's just not worry about salvation. Look at what James says in James chapter 4. We're going to begin reading in verse 14. Yet you do not know what tomorrow will bring. Is that a true statement? Now, I know you've got plans for tomorrow, to go to work or whatever it is, and you are relatively confident that that is going to take place. But let me ask you, can you guarantee me that? Can you guarantee me that tomorrow is going to come? And you say, well, wait a minute, this is outside of my realm. I don't have any control of those types of things. I don't have that type of way to give you a guarantee. Okay, good. So we are all on the same page here. You don't know what tomorrow holds. And James says, then, what is your life? For you are a mist that appears for a little time and then vanishes. Instead, you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we will live and do this or that. As it is, you boast in your arrogance. All such boasting is evil. So whoever boasts, and all such boasting is evil. So whoever knows the right thing to do and fails to do it, for him it is sin. Do you accept that biblical principle that God is in control? I hope you do. I hope that that's not a problem for you. But if you accept that, then you have no control over tomorrow. Then you must agree that you don't know if you are going to be even alive tomorrow. That though you have lived perhaps for years or decades or even scores, I know we don't have anybody here beyond a century, right? Though you have lived a long time, it has all been by the grace of God, and none of us are guaranteed tomorrow. And so I say that to come back to my original question: when is the right time for somebody to commit themselves to God? And the answer, James would say, if you think you've got a hold on tomorrow, you are boasting against the will of God, and that arrogance is evil. Does God's grace extend today? Well, yes, I know that because here I am and here you are. But I can't guarantee you that it's going to reach the end of my sermon. You know, in fact, we should offer the invitation. I've thought about this before, at the beginning of service. That way, if anybody was struggling with sin and needing to be restored back unto the Lord, that they could do that right at the beginning. Because I can't guarantee you the next hour or the next 15 minutes or however long that it is that I will preach, because it's all within God's hands. And whenever the trumpet sounds and whenever Christ returns and descends upon that cloud, the time, the era, the historic moment for salvation is done. It's over, that opportunity to be saved. And if you have accepted it, then there will be rejoicing. But if you have yet to accept it at that moment, the way the Bible describes it is that you are going to call for the rocks to fall upon you. And so, Paul, tell me, when is an acceptable time to accept the Lord? And Paul would say, now, because you know that God's grace extends to you right now, to every man, to every woman, to every race, to every economic status, no matter where you live. God's grace extends to all classes. God's grace extends to all ages, as long as you are accountable. We know that there are those that have yet to reach that age of knowledge of good and evil and are not accountable yet, and that God sees them as being innocent and they will be in heaven, right? We don't inherit sin, we commit sin. Ezekiel chapter 18, the sin or the righteousness or the unrighteousness of the father cannot be passed on to the child or unto the son. The soul that sins will die, Ezekiel chapter 18, and yet the soul that sins will die. I am accountable. And at this moment in time, Paul would say, do not let that invitation of God's grace to go by in vain. All ages, as long as they have reached that age of a knowledge of good and evil and are able to come in faith to him. Where would you fit? Are you young? Are you middle-aged? Are you old? I know whenever we get up into the elderly years, we don't like to consider ourselves to be old, but let's just have a mental race, okay? I want you, mental race, for you to pick out somebody within the auditorium that you are going to race, and it's going to start in the fellowship hall there at the countertop, okay? And you got to pick somebody, all right? Somebody probably that you'd like to win over, right? And you're going to race through the fellowship hall, through this hallway into the foyer, and then back down to the front. Who would you pick? Well, if you're walking with a cane or with some help, you're obviously not going to pick, Hadley or one of these young ones to go up against, right? Because we all walk at different strides. I mean, if you were to even just be at your regular walking pace, it's kind of sweet whenever we would take family walks whenever the kids were even smaller, and we all had different strides. And so in order to walk together, we all had to change our stride somewhat in order to be together, because one was either lagging behind or running out in front. And of course, with my step and being elongated, I step out there a little bit quicker than everybody else. But we all have different strides. Did you see the title of my lesson for this evening? Strider, stroller, and shuffler. Now, some of you got that. There was a character within J.R. Tolkien's book, The Lord of the Rings, and he was called Strider, and it wasn't because he was strident or hard to get along with. It was because he was a walker, that he was one that would walk across the countryside in order to help folks out. He was actually a prince at the end of the story, but a strider. Strider was his name. You imagine somebody who is a strider, and how do they walk? Well, they have that elongated step, and they can move, right? And you see this in varying degrees between those that you know, those ones that you love. How do you walk whenever you go to places? And you say, well, that all depends upon the conditions of where it is that I'm walking, whether there's an incline or not. And in fact, we'd have to all agree that sometimes that we are striders and sometimes we are strollers. And sometimes we might even be shufflers. Did you see the NHS had this precautionary warning on how to walk on the ice? Here recently they made a video, and I think it was more for PR, public relation type of thing, and they were showing you how to walk on the ice like a penguin. And they were teaching you to waddle like a penguin as you move so that you moved safely on that ice. But strider, stroller, and shuffler. Okay, I want you to think, where do I fit in? Where am I? When is the time that is best for somebody to give themselves to God? As a strider, as a stroller, or as a shuffler? When is the time that God would have us to become His? He calls all men, all races, all status, all ages. God would have us become His regardless of where we find ourselves. You must agree, in education or in vocation or in retirement. And if we have yet to come to Him, He is calling. The invitation is sitting in your mailbox. Christ is available unto you. Salvation is here. Put Him on in baptism. You can respond. But Paul says, don't allow that invitation to go by in vain. What's Paul saying? You got to respond to it. And James says, because you don't know about tomorrow, because your life is like a vapor. It's like a mist. It's only here for a little while and then it's gone. Okay, we're going to go back to Ecclesiastes chapter 12. If you want to go back, we're going to read it. Remember, is there an optimum time to come to God? Now is the time, of course, but is there an optimum time for us to come to the Lord? And this is going to be from the Good News Bible, and you're going to hear some things that you're going to say, I didn't hear it said that way within the English Standard Version, but here it goes. So remember your Creator while you are still young, before those dismal days and years come, whenever you say, I don't enjoy life. That is when the light of the sun, the moon, and the stars will grow dim for you. What is he describing? The eyes, right? They're starting to fail you. Whenever the rain clouds will never pass away, that's whenever the glasses don't help anymore, and now you have the cataracts that have sat in and are present. Then your arms that have protected you will tremble. Do you want to do that test where you have to hold out your hand and to see just how steady your hand is? When your arms that have protected you will tremble, and your legs that are now strong will grow weak. Taking a step and your knee giving out on you before? Where your teeth will be too few to chew your food. You say, I didn't see that within the English Standard Version. Your eyes too dim to see clearly. What is he describing? I asked you, are you young, are you middle-aged, or are you old? Your ears will be deaf to the noise of the streets. You will barely be able to hear the mill as it grinds or as the music plays. You ever walked into somebody's house and they forgot to mute the TV before you came in, and the volume on that TV is at such a level that you can't even hear yourself think? I know some of you have just attributed a name to that. But you will be afraid of high places, and walking will be dangerous. Your hair will turn white. You will hardly be able to drag yourself along, and all your desire will be gone. We are going to our final resting place, and then there will be mourning in the streets. The silver chain will snap. The golden lamp will fall and break. The rope at the well will break, and the water jar will be shattered. You know what he is describing? We are all earthen vessels, and he is describing the day of our death. And so he says, if that's not plain enough, our bodies will return to the dust of the earth, and the breath of the life will go back to God who gave it to us. Now, how did he start that particular subject? Remember now thy Creator in the days of your youth, before you reach a point where you are unable to work for the Lord like you should. How many of you got married whenever you were young? Yeah. Why did you do that? You say, I have been asking myself that question since then. No. Why do we get married whenever we are young? Why don't we wait until we are 40 or 50 to get married? You start doing the math on that. And for my kids to get married in their early 20s, that's going to put me at what age in order that I have grandkids. And I want to be a part of my grandkids' life. I want to be there and be there for them. Why do we marry whenever we are young? Because that is an opportune time. Why does our military service have an enlistment date at 18 and then they have a cutoff date? Why do our firefighters and our first responders, God bless them, why do they always seem to be young, those ones that are dying? What is it about youth? Well, it's a time whenever we are full of strength, of vim and vigor. It's a time whenever you can make changes that will what? Have a lifetime of consequences. For the good, and it can be also for the bad. They will last a lifetime. It's an opportunity, it's the potential, it's the promise that is there that we have whenever we are young. And what is the ecclesiastical writer saying? He is saying, commit yourself unto the Lord as young as possible. Why? Because then you will have the opportunity to serve him and not be discouraged whenever your body is so weak, but your faith is strong. Is that a Christian principle? That the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak? That is Paul at the end of his life saying that the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak, because Paul was frustrated. How long do you think the Apostle Paul would have lived if he was able to, at the end of each year, claim another year from the Lord? Do you think that he would be with us today? Why is it that Paul, as far as we know, probably died somewhere around AD 70? Why is it that the Apostle Paul dies before even the completion, it seems, of the New Testament, some 20 or 30 years before the final writings of John in the books like 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John and his gospel? Paul seemingly is already gone. We don't know for sure, of course, but according to the details that we have, why are our lives seemingly cut short? What did man do whenever he seemingly lived forever? Methuselah, would you like to live to be 969 years old? What was it that God said about the earth during the time of Noah? He said that it was only full of wickedness. The imagination of their hearts was only wicked all the time, and that the earth was full of violence. God doesn't give us long life because I think we would waste it. And in fact, I don't think that we do a very good job with the short life that he has given us. And so let me go back to my original question. When is the optimum time for someone to give themselves to the Lord? Now, right? That's the answer. It doesn't matter if you're 15, 30, 50, 80, 90. God bless you if you're above that. But some will say, well, because I am so old and I haven't been faithful to the Lord doesn't want me. Oh, no. Turn with me to Matthew 20. Let's go there. That Bible verse where Christ teaches that he will accept anyone who comes into his vineyard to work. Go with me, Matthew chapter 20, beginning in verse 1. Let's just read this parable so you're aware of what Christ said about entering into his vineyard. For the kingdom of heaven is like a master of a house who went out early in the morning to hire laborers for his vineyard. After agreeing with laborers for a denarius for a day, he sent them into the vineyard. And going out about the 3rd hour, he saw others standing idle in the market. And to them he said, you go into the vineyard too, and whatever is right I will give you. And so they went. Going out again about the 6th hour and the 9th hour, he did the same. And about the 11th hour, he went out and he found others standing. And he said to them, why do you stand here idle all day? And they said to him, because no one has hired us. And he said to them, you go into the vineyard too. And when evening came, the owner of the vineyard said to his foreman, call the laborers and pay them their wages, beginning with the last and up unto the first. And when those hired about the 11th hour came, each of them received a denarius. Now, when those hired first came, they thought that they would receive more, but each of them also received a denarius. And on receiving it, they grumbled at the master of the house. They said, these last ones worked only an hour, and you have made them equal to us who have bore the burden of the day and of the scorching heat? And he replied to one of them, friend, I am doing you no wrong. Did you not agree with me for a denarius? Take what belongs to you and go. I choose to give this to the last worker as I gave to you. Am I not allowed to do what I choose with what belongs to me? Or do you begrudge my generosity? And so the last will be first, and the first will be last. What was it that the Lord was teaching? When is the optimum time to come to the Lord? I know, 5 o'clock. The last hour, right? What a deal. And I think that's the way we treat God sometimes. I think we say, Lord, I've got places to be. I've got better things that I want to do. Who wants to work at 6 a.m. anyways? Who wants to toil in the heat of the day? Who wants that? And I question God's mercy and his timing and his generosity. And the Lord says, when I ask to come into the vineyard, that is the time to get into the vineyard. So, if you are sitting here this evening and you have heard this lesson, you know the Lord has called you into the vineyard. Won't you come as we stand and as we sing?